My husband told me to stop snooping when I asked about a secret credit card. So I opened the statement at dinner, and everyone saw what he'd been hiding. I'm 33F. My husband is Tom, 36. We'd been married 9 years. For most of that time, he did the spreadsheets and I did the calendar, which somehow made us both comfortable, him tracking numbers and me keeping the home moving. We have 2 kids, a mortgage in the suburbs, and the kind of life that looks steady in photos. Soccer games, birthday cakes, family trips. I never thought the thing that broke us would be paper and a bank logo. It started as little things that nagged at me. Tom began staying late at the office more often. He'd say it was a project, a deadline, that he had to put in extra hours. Sometimes he'd text a selfie of him at his desk with a tired smile and the caption, "We'll be late." Other times he'd say the meeting ran over and he'd grab a quiet dinner. I trusted him, so I didn't pry. But when the quiet dinners turned into multiple late nights in a row, I started paying closer attention to our accounts. We keep a shared bank login for household bills. I handle the mortgage and the kids' daycare invoices. Tom has the credit cards tied to our travel points. That had always worked. One afternoon, while reconciling a bill, I noticed an auto-pay withdrawal labeled with a bank I didn't recognize. The amount was larger than anything we normally spent on hotel points, and the withdrawal didn't show up in the usual cards. I asked Tom casually where the charge was from. He said he'd signed up for a new rewards card for work travel. He was brisk about it, and then changed the subject. That felt odd, but not criminal. I let it go for a week. Then a letter arrived addressed to him at our home. Account statement enclosed. It was from a bank we'd never had a product with. Tom was home, and I handed it to him. He made a face and told me not to open his mail, that it was private. He said the word snooping like it was a crime. That line, "Stop snooping," is the kind of thing that lands when someone wants the conversation over. I nodded and shoved it in a drawer because I didn't want the scene. The next day, another envelope slipped under the door. It was thicker, multiple pages. That night, after the kids were in bed, I went through the kitchen drawer where Tom kept his miscellaneous wallet stuff. I told myself I was looking for a pen. I found the extra mail instead. The top page was a statement for an account under Thomas H., but the card number and many charges were for things that didn't fit our life. Hotel stays in 2 cities, a string of restaurant charges at places I'd never heard of, a florist charge with a woman's name I didn't know beside it. There were also charges to courier services and a recurring payment to something labeled membership, LM. I don't know why I read it. Maybe because the way he'd shut me down with "stop snooping" left me with a raw insistence to know. I read every line. The running balance was big enough that if left unchecked, it would have started to affect our shared cash flow within months. It wasn't just emotional betrayal that pressed on my throat. It was the quiet panic of hidden debt coupled with the idea of gifts and dinners and an unfamiliar name in the ledger. I folded the pages, put them in an envelope, and told myself again I'd handle it calmly. The following weekend, we had my sister and her husband over for dinner, plus my parents. It was casual lasagna, garlic bread, the kids running around. Tom joked and poured wine, and I sat through the small talk while the envelope thudded in my bag like something that wanted a voice. When my sister asked about the colors we'd wanted for the nursery art we'd been picking out months ago, the conversation veered toward our usual life. I felt a weight that wasn't just the envelope. It was months of small lies, of excuses that became a way for him to avoid being asked hard things. The thing about keeping a secret is that the secret insists on being seen at some point. So I set the envelope down on the stack of mail on the counter, and when Tom got up to clear a plate, I slid it toward the center of the table and did something I had never done before. I opened it. I didn't shout. I didn't throw the papers. I placed the statement on the table like an uninvited fact and said, plainly, that I had a question. The room tightened. My mother paused mid-forkful. My sister looked at me like she hadn't expected the evening to be an interrogation. I didn't want a scene where the kids saw grown-ups screaming, so I kept my voice low. Tom's face went through 3 stages: surprise, annoyance, then the practiced hurt he'd always used to end arguments. He told me to stop snooping, said this was private, said whatever charges there were for work. He asked me not to humiliate him. The word humiliate landed like a lit match. It flicked between the faces at the table. Nobody spoke. So I did the last thing I thought I'd ever do. I read the statement aloud. I read the merchant names, the dates, the cities. I read the line item that said, Hotel, Atlanta, followed by a charge for 2 nights, then Hotel, Nashville, 3 weeks later. I read the florist charge with the name, L.M. Then the repeated dinners at a restaurant I'd never heard of that were dated on weeknights. My mother's fork paused. My sister's hand went white around her glass. Tom's jaw clenched. He stood, voice small at first, and then clipped, said those 2 words again, stop snooping, and then tried to explain that the charges were for client entertainment and the florist was an office bouquet. He said the hotel stays were training sessions that required overnight stays. The list of explanations was rehearsed enough to suggest they'd been used before. I told him to stop talking over me. I told him to explain who LM was. Tom said it was a vendor's assistant, that the initials were nothing, that I was turning a small thing into a disaster. My sister, who knows both of us well, asked a direct question. If it was work, why was the mailing address on the account his home, and why was his mobile number on the statement? He faltered. It was the first real crack. He told people that I had invaded his privacy, and that this was an unfair public humiliation. My mom looked shocked, and for a hot second I felt the old reflex, apologize and make the room calm. Except the paper on the table had more lines and more dates, and the names of the restaurants spelled out a pattern. Someone asked Tom whether he had an alternate card in his name. His answer was a strained no, and then he admitted there was a second card he'd placed for convenience when traveling. Nothing more. When a wife reads line items like L.M., floral $124 and follows the dots, you start to interpret the ledger as a language. The ledger said, multiple late-night dinners, flowers, hotel nights, courier messages with notes, recurring membership labeled with initials. Tom looked at my parents, at my sister, and finally at me, and his face was small in that way people become when they are cornered by truth. Update. 1 day later. The immediate fallout was boiling and private. Tom left shortly after everyone did. He packed a bag and drove to a friend's house. He texted that night accusing me of breaking trust, of shaming him. I texted back only to say I wasn't trying to shame him. I wanted honesty. He called me controlling again, but the tone had a shaky edge. I slept on the couch because the house felt brittle. Over the next day, he admitted, finally in a talk that had no audience, that there had been a woman named Lauren, not a vendor, and that the card had been used for dinners and gifts. He said it started innocently, that she'd been supportive while he'd been working long hours on a contract in a different city. He said he hadn't thought it was a big deal, that it felt like privacy, then shame had made him hide it. He begged for time and asked me not to tell the kids. He said he was sorry. It sounds like the notes people make in movies, but the admission was a relief and a fresh wound at the same time. We tried to talk calmly. I asked about the money. He admitted the balance was significant and that he'd been paying minimums. He said he hadn't told me because he was embarrassed. I asked how he could have paid for hotels and flowers without money coming from somewhere, and he showed me that our joint account had been balanced because he'd shifted some freelance checks to cover the autopay. That was betrayal in a new register, a hidden financial house of cards in addition to the interpersonal one. I put a freeze on the household credit cards that day. I called the bank, set alerts, and changed passwords. The logistical stuff felt adult and confident. The emotional stuff felt raw and terrible. He asked for counseling, for space, for forgiveness. I agreed to counseling in theory, but told him I needed documents, full statements, names, and explanations. He gave them grudgingly. Update. 2 weeks later, we started counseling. The first sessions were mostly logistics and how we'd been avoiding finances as a married couple for convenience. Tom explained that work pressure had made an opening for poor choices. He'd been lonely, he said, and attention felt like a patch. He'd also been terrible at owning it. The therapist asked pointed questions. What did we want? Could we stay together if heavy financial dishonesty happened? At home, we made hard rules. Immediate disclosure of any new accounts, a joint budget we both reviewed weekly, and tight limits on single-person spending above a certain amount. Tom did show contrition in small ways. He cut contacts with Lauren after a messy phone call where she accused him of leaving her and him of being a liar. He called the bank and closed the second card. He started tracking expenses in a shared spreadsheet and sat with me while I reconciled old charges. On paper, he was trying. In private, some of the old defensiveness returned. When he was stressed, he'd snap that I was prying. The phrase, "stop snooping," still hung in the air between us like a smell. Friends and family inevitably took sides in private messages. A cousin told me I should have handled it differently. A mutual friend messaged that Tom had looked miserable the other day, and he thought we should try to work it out. My sister sat me down and said what friends often say in these moments. Trust has been broken and rebuilding doesn't happen on a timeline. That sentence turned out to be the most honest thing anyone said to me for months. We tightened the budget. We delayed a planned family vacation. We spoke in the evenings with deliberate dullness about numbers and bills. We both slept poorly. The kids were blissfully unaware, which felt like a mercy and a cruelty all at once. Update. 3 months later. The first month felt like damage control. The second month felt like trying to live in 2 different houses at once, co-parenting during the day, living in separate worlds at night. I caught myself monitoring our shared finances obsessively. He would occasionally apologize in ways that felt rehearsed. We attended therapy, made lists, and tried to be pragmatic. Tom paid more attention to the kids and managed to make some extra income with a freelance gig which helped with the ledger but didn't fix the trust. Then something else happened I hadn't expected. I found a filing cabinet key in a jacket he left behind. In the cabinet were letters from the woman and a stack of airline confirmations that predated the statement I'd first found. They weren't just dinners. There had been flights. When I showed him, he didn't deny it. He said they had flown to see friends in another city and that nothing happened beyond the one kiss he'd admitted to. The pattern of deceit became a pattern with a past. We talked and argued and cried until our words were cheap. We tried separation for a few weeks with check-ins, then trial co-parenting schedules. He proposed we live apart for a while without divorce, see how therapy went, and revisit. That felt like being in a swing space that never landed. I wanted closure, and he wanted to fix the thing without losing his life. Those desires are often incompatible. A month later, he told me he couldn't promise he wouldn't think about leaving. That night I sat in the kitchen with a mug of tea and a stack of papers and realized that the life we'd built had a hole in it I didn't know how to stitch. Final update, 6 months later. 6 months from when I read the first statement at the dinner table, we finalized our separation. We really tried therapy, financial counseling, and honest conversations that bled into the small hours. But the combination of a secret relationship, the money that had been siphoned away for months, and the erosion of daily trust made the math of staying together ugly. We listed the house and sold it. The kids now live mostly with me during the week and visit Tom on weekends. We agreed on a custody arrangement and split the furniture and accounts in what was often a careful, adult way. Friends splintered. My parents were quiet and careful. I don't boast about any victory. I don't imagine a clean moral wrap to this. It's a life that got rearranged. In the end, the statement that evening did two things. It forced a dirty conversation into daylight, and it closed the door on a version of us that had once been easy. I don't know whether I made the right dramatic choice by opening that paper at the table. Maybe there were softer routes. But the calendar pages of our kids' lives kept flipping, and I didn't want to keep pretending a secret on a credit card wouldn't eventually become a secret on a separation agreement. We've split our friends, adjusted routines, and tried to be decent at the practical parts. Tuition, doctors, holiday lists. I take the kids to school and make coffee in bulk on Monday mornings. Tom texts on birthdays. Sometimes he drops off something the kids left at his place. The shared spreadsheet still exists because we are adults and because the kids need clarity. There's no poetic last line here. There's a kitchen with a dented table, a box of old statements in a folder, and two people learning to live on different sides of a once shared life. The statement I read at dinner sits in a file drawer. It was paperwork that forced us to see ourselves honestly. What we did with that truth is what changed everything.